Right, so we've added Bootstrap to our site, and we've neutralized all of those sort of default styles that the browser applies, and applied a sort of more modern set of default styles using that library. What we're going to do now is use another aspect of Bootstrap, which is allows us to very easily create what we call responsive layouts. And so we're just going to get a bit of an intro to responsive layouts now, but if you go to the second course, in the specialization, we sort of deal with responsive layouts in a little bit more depth and explain more how you can gain control over those. But for now, let's just sort of get a brief idea of how they work. So the basic idea is that I have a grid like this, and I think of my web page as being a grid which has 12 columns in like that. So you've got 1 through 12. And if I've got some content on my web page, I can choose how much of that grid it takes up. So I might want, say, I might want to have, say, two panels which take up 6 grid squares each, for example. So let's say I decided I want, the design for my web page is going to be 2 panels, and each of those panels, therefore, is going to take up half of the complete space. So that would take up 6 grid spaces per panel. And how do we write that in code in Bootstrap? Well, let's just go through and sort of code that up. All right, so first thing is, there's my sort of neutralized Bootstrap web page, and the code is here. So I've got the index file, and I'm going to start just by editing index and sort of creating 2 panels to show you how that works. And I do that by, first of all, you wrap everything in div tags in Bootstrap, so you'll get used to writing the div tag really quickly the more Bootstrap you do, because you're going to write a lot of them. And the div tag is a sort of interesting tag in HTML. It isn't really used to sort of signify that anything has any particular purpose. It's more used to separate different parts of the document so that you can deal with them in different ways, for example in your CSS. So unlike an H1 tag, which means this is a heading, or an A tag, which means this is a link, a div tag doesn't really instruct the browser to do anything in particular. It's a way of us connecting maybe a set of CSS styles to a particular thing, or sort of showing and hiding different bits of our page. And so in Bootstrap they use divs for really structuring things and applying different styles. And the style we want to apply here is the concept that this div, so this page, is going to have sort of two columns. All right, and so first of all we wrap everything in a container div, which does this. You see it moved the page across a bit, and that now we're using the sort of proper Bootstrap layout. And then we create another div which has the class of row, and row signifies one of these things here. Okay, that's a row, and inside the row we're going to create another div, and the class of this div is going to be col md6. Okay, and I can put some content here. For panel 1, for panel 2. So effectively what I've done there is I've defined 2 panels, one of which is taking up 6, and the other one of which is taking up 6 as well. So there we have it, 2 6 wide. So 6 just signifies how many of these kind of grid squares this panel takes up. And you can see we've got a row and then columns inside the row. And we can have as many rows and columns as we like, as long as we sort of consider the fact that each row has to add up to 12 columns in total. So let's have a look at that page. Okay, so you can see that one panel's gone there and one panel's gone there. And if we want to really clearly see what's going on, let's just draw a border around those two things so that we can see what they're doing. So I'm going to define a new style called which gives a border to things. So I'm going to put my old style sheet back in. Okay, so I'm back in the head part of the document here, and my style sheet is called styles.css. So you can see you can actually include lots of style sheets. It's fine, you can add as many as you like. And the idea of that is that they cascade into each other. So the Bootstrap CSS, we looked at that earlier and it had loads and loads of different styles. So that's our starting set of styles. And then we add styles.css to that. And if it has any things that have the same class, then it will override what's going on. So each style sheet you add can kind of override things that happened in the previous style sheet, or indeed add new ones. And again, that's quite a common thing. So you might start with a default style sheet and then modify it a bit. So when we're modifying the way that Bootstrap displays things, we'll put that in a separate file. We don't edit Bootstrap CSS. Okay, so there's style CSS. And first, let's open up style CSS. And drop it into the text editor there. And I don't need any of these styles anymore because I'm now letting Bootstrap style up my page. But I would like to create a new class called thin border, right? And thin border is just going to create a border on whatever you set it to. So border 1 pixel solid black. Okay, so that will create a thin border on whatever you set it to. So then I can go into here. So just reminding you of the syntax there. So full stop thin border means I'm defining a new CSS class, and then everything in the brackets, that's the CSS class properties. Okay, and then I can put a comment in to just explain what it's doing. Use this to put borders around things. Okay, so that's a CSS comment. So you notice that there's different types of comments for CSS and HTML. Okay, then I just need to add that class. So it's called thin border, right? And that's my custom class. And then when I reload the page, I should now see that I've got a border, right? So I just added a border around so I could see the layout. And so let's just sort of play around with that a bit. What happens if maybe one of them was 3 and one of them was 9? So if we think about the grid, then that's the equivalent of shrinking that one down to 3 and putting that one up to 9. So it should look something like this, right? So let's go back. There we are. So now we've got that one's sort of shortened and that one's bigger. So that we can control sort of how much of the grid. As long as it adds up to 12, it's fine. So the last thing I sort of want to see is what happens when someone looks at this on a browser with a different size window. And that's responsive, right? That's the responsive thing. Because you can see this page is quite wide. And imagine looking at that on a phone. It's going to be difficult because you have to kind of pull it across and go over there. You've probably done that if you tried to, book tickets on one of those old websites where they haven't updated it properly yet and you're kind of sweeping around all over the place. Well, responsive is a solution to that. So let's see what happens when I simulate looking at this on a thinner browser. Right, there you go. So did you see what happened? You can see there's kind of several steps where it kind of lays out the page in a slightly different way. And so at one point it steps down and boink, it goes down to two rows instead. And that's built into the sort of gridding functionality that we get with Bootstrap, the idea that the grid automatically lays itself out properly. And so now if I'm looking at that on a phone, my grid, it doesn't look exactly how I laid it out, but it means it's more usable on the phone. It's making the best possible use of that kind of long and thin display. Okay, so that's our first real bit of responsive web programming. So well done to get this far, and please go and try those code examples out for yourself.